Welcome to Rewiring Health, your hub for transformation and empowerment. I'm your host, Kelly Kessler, and I'm here to guide you in aligning with your true self. Discover the freedom and vibrancy within you as we release patterns of self-abandonment and transcend the health impacts of stress. Get ready to unlock your potential and embrace the freedom and vitality you've been seeking. Now let's dive in. Our bodies hold tremendous intelligence when it comes to our emotional and mental well-being. But if we're not listening, we're missing a huge component when it comes to living our life with freedom and fulfillment. And this is why I'm so honored to have Christopher Lee Maher on the podcast today. Christopher Lee was a Navy SEAL in the prime of his physical fitness and his life. However, underneath the surface, he was dealing with extreme amounts of stress that eventually would manifest into pain throughout his body, affecting his vision, his hearing, and leaving him with multiple sleepless nights. In this episode, Christopher shares his tremendous journey of dealing with the trauma of built-up stress throughout his life and how he healed holistically, understanding his body's intelligence and allowing him to release the patterns that were holding him hostage in his own life. This is such a profound and inspirational episode, and I am so grateful for everything he shared in this. This episode will leave you with a greater understanding of the intelligence that you have within your body and how to truly understand it so that you can heal from the inside out and live with more freedom. Well, I'm so grateful to have Christopher Lee Maher on the podcast today. So thank you so much for being here, and I can't wait to get into this.
Okay. One, I'm grateful. Thank you for bringing me on. And for the listeners, she shared with me sort of, what your process is and where you struggle in reality. So I will orientate my message to hit their specific needs.
Amazing. I love it. And just the brief time we just talked before this, I know this is going to be value packed. So I can't wait to get into it. And one I think the most profound things is someone's journey and the story that leads them to some of this process of transformation and really introspection. So I would love to hear your journey. What led you to helping the people you help and your evolution through life?
I think pain.
Hmm.
If I was thinking about this the other day. I was in Pennsylvania watching the NCAA championships and emotionally supporting Penn State University,
Hmm.
the wrestlers there. And a few times on the train and the taxi, going back and forth, I was thinking about pain and loss, right? And I used to say that pain and loss are life's greatest teachers. And then I realized that actually loss is painful. And so we should really get rid of loss as the
Hmm.
driver and just go that pain is life's greatest teacher.
Hmm.
And it can lead to the greatest amounts of transformation. And I ended up with a body full of pain. I was high achieving, super successful, very ambitious. I had a client in La Jolla, wrote a book called The Dark Side of the Light Chasers. And I remember after like 2 or 3 sessions working with her, she was like, "You're the most ambitious person I've ever met spiritually." And I was like, "Oh, okay." I didn't even really consider what she was talking about. And then if I reflect on my life, I realize she's actually correct. I am
Hmm.
the most spiritually ambitious person. And what I mean by that is this: when you look at spiritual versus mental, physical, or emotional or environmental, spiritual is about the energy, right? It's about the consciousness, right? Um, and so I was always someone who was aware of what was correct for me.
Hmm.
And yet I was in environments that never really worked for me because I was someone that was born to operate outside of structure. And I'm very comfortable with the unknown. But I was sent to a boarding school at 7 years old, and everything there is structure.
Hmm.
So we got up at the same time, we ate at the same time, We cleaned the dishes at the same time. We did the chores at the same time. We drove to school at the same time. We went to school the same hours constantly. We went on vacations at the same time. Like every minute of my day was structured. And for a lot of students that graduated from the school that I went to, they were grateful for that experience. The challenge with that is that that experience never really worked for me because I don't know if you know anything about human design. Okay.
A little bit, yeah,
Okay.
somewhat familiar with
Okay.
it.
So in human design, I'm what's called a quad right.
Mhm,
And as a quad right, it means that all of my systems, my relationship with food, my relationship with my mind, my relationship with my body, my relationship with my emotions are all passive,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
And so I was my first, so from 7 to 27, so for basically 20 years, I was in completely structured environments. And
mhm,
that caused my body to tighten up, become restricted, and those restrictions rotated my bones in the wrong directions. And then that level of distortion started to create consistent states of discomfort all up and down the left side of my body. So from my left heel all the way up to the left side of my neck.
mhm.
And I
Wow.
lived in pain, and the pain was chronic, and it was non compromising. It was
Mhm,
with me all the time.
mhm,
So I had to figure out how to get out of that because what they offered for me was a hip replacement. And that was an invitation, but for me, it was an invitation to go holistic
mhm,
because I was never going to let someone cut out my bone
mhm,
because I understood that bone is like in its essential material, right? And I was like, no. And then I went and I watched the surgery, okay?
mhm,
And they brought out the, and what's interesting is the people who lose their hips are people who have medial hamstrings that are too short and too tight. And people who have medial hamstrings that are too short and too tight all have one thing in common. They sacrifice themselves in order to maintain relationships with others because they have an inability to communicate their desires, wants, and needs to the community around them. So their sphere of influence never ever, they never allow themselves to receive from their sphere of influence. They're always the person initiating the action of love. So all of their love goes outward and none of their love goes inward, right? So when we look at love, when I look at how I was operating in a way that allowed me to maintain control of all of those relationships that I was in because I was the initiator, I was the giver of love. I was the giver of time. I was the giver of energy. I was the giver of advice.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
the thing about energy and stress and tension and structural distortion is that it can only move in one direction for so long. Okay. And I had swung all the way to the left. Other people, they swing all the way to the right. Whichever direction you're swinging, your first indication that you're way outside of balance is you have pain in your body, whether it's a headache, whether it's a neck ache, whether it's the shoulders, the wrists, the ankles, the knees, the toes, the fingers, or the low back, or the wrist. All of that is a deep indication that your structure is severely distorted.
Mhm,
And my structure was severely distorted. Well, the only way to get out of having a severely distorted structure is to remove the tension that's creating the distortion. And you, as someone who studied physical therapy, you understand a relationship between strength
mhm,
and stress and tension.
mhm,
And I was fortunate enough in my journey to meet a few people who knew a little bit more than everyone else. And I needed to go a mile. And in the holistic community, they had tools that could take me a half an inch. Yet I was grateful for every half an inch because it meant I would have a reprieve from the chronic discomfort that I was suffering from, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
when you're suffering, um, it can be a lonely journey because
Mhm.
people who are high achieving performers have a strong attachment to their identity.
Mhm.
And so that strong attachment to my identity was never going to allow anyone in to come to see where I was fragmented, uh, failing, frail, or excessively contained or controlled. And so I used my ability to help others as a deterrent to keep them away from these sensitive parts inside of me.
Mhm.
And so my story really is breaking the pattern. And the
Mhm.
question is, how did I break the pattern? Well, the pain got so excruciating in my left hip. I was in a car accident. Guy came through a light. He had a red light. I had a green light. As soon as I got in the middle, he T-boned my car. It spun around. It hit a light pole. It spun the other direction. And the next day when I woke up, all the pain on the left side of my body was pointed into the middle of my left hip.
Mhm.
And so I needed to create a pattern interrupt.
Mhm.
And I called a friend of mine and I said, hey, I'm suffering. And he came over to my house where I was living at the time with a yoga mat and a juicer. And it took me a long time to drink that juice. That juice was like, I think it was radish, parsley, carrot. I think there might have been beet. There's like a little slice of apple, spinach. And it took me about 30 minutes to get that thing down.
Mhm.
Because at the time, my favorite beverage was beer and
Mhm.
Gatorade.
Mhm.
So I basically lived on beer and Gatorade. If I wasn't drinking beer, I was drinking Gatorade
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
I was still an athlete at the time.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I was training for the Olympic trials.
Mhm.
Um, I wanted to make the Olympic trials in 800 meters, had successful coaches, and I was chronically injured.
Mhm.
I'd have a nice race, and then boom, I'd have an injury a week later, and then I would be suffering for 3 months. And then my injuries continue to keep shifting around, right? They'd go from this joint, then this place, because I grew up as a US Navy SEAL.
Mhm.
And as a US Navy SEAL, you're indoctrinated into the idea that if you don't mind the pain, then it really doesn't matter. Keep pushing forward because what matters most is completing your vision of who it is you want to be.
Mhm.
And I had no idea at the time that that was a great mindset for becoming a Navy SEAL, but
Mhm.
it was a limiting belief
Mhm.
for all of my other goals.
Yeah.
And so I took that limiting belief to its exodus and I failed miserably and developed a body full of pain to prove that the idea that I had bought into was false.
Mhm.
Because the only way you can get into pain of any sort, physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual, is if you're abiding by a limiting belief that's false.
Mhm.
Because, see, anything that's true brings your body into supreme alignment and balance.
Mhm.
And so, as I started to meet more people that knew a little bit more about the body than I did, meaning my version of being physically intelligent before was my ability to use my body to produce a physical result. I had no idea you could use the body in order to develop yourself psychologically. You could use the body in order to develop yourself emotionally. You could use the body to develop yourself spiritually. You could use the body to develop yourself energetically by doing the exact opposite thing that I was doing. I tell people all the time any monkey can put tons of tension in their body, but it takes a real genius and a severe amount or supreme amount of commitment to remove all that tension and bring your body from pain back into pleasure.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so that's my story.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, there's tons more. I mean, we could go on for
Yeah.
months. We could have
Yeah.
an hour-long conversation and I could go on and on and on. But the most important thing that I think for your audience to understand is that I have been at the effect of what they are living with.
Hmm.
Okay? So let me give you an idea. Insomniac, okay? Losing my vision at 29. I mean, losing my hearing at 29, losing my vision at 31, needing a full blown hip replacement at 33, living with insomnia for about a half a decade, okay? Um, in constant need of naps, uh, drained, moving around like a zombie, but still continuing to move forward. And while I'm in this state, I decided to go to medical school,
Hmm.
right? Because, well, once I decided to take care of my body and retire from being an athlete, I thought, oh, well, let's go after something else that's extraordinary, right? And so I did that for 3 years. So I was still in the mix of all of that and growing simultaneously through these limiting beliefs that I employed that caused me a lot of pain and discomfort. And you and I talked earlier, and I said, look, pain is the greatest. I used to say pain and loss.
Hmm.
And, this week while I was in Pennsylvania, I realized that, well, loss leads to pain. So the sense is that pain really is the number one teacher if you're willing to listen. And if you're unwilling to listen, the body is willing to continue to give you more pain. And the question is, well, what's painful? Exhaustion. Anyone who has chronic fatigue syndrome, that is as painful as chronic low back pain.
Hmm.
Okay. Anyone who has feelings of loneliness, right? Feelings of being misunderstood, feelings of never really belonging. All of that is painful. It's as painful as having chronic neck pain. And so when we look at pain and we look at the body, we have to begin to surrender and submit to the idea that my pain is indicating to me where my inner deficiencies are and where
Hmm.
my insecurities are. And so if I solve my pain, I then move from being insecure to secure.
Hmm.
I then move from being inner deficient to being um, balanced and complete. If I'm disconnected, I move into feeling connected. If I'm angry, I move into feeling loving. If I'm anxious, I move into feeling excited. If I'm fearful, I move into being confident. And if I'm self righteous, I move into being righteous. And all of these channels of energy and consciousness and intelligence, they all live inside the human body. And if you're willing, if you have a teacher and you know where these places are and you're willing to do the work, you can turn all of that pain into absolute pleasure. You can turn all of that failure into absolute success. When I say failure, I have a different definition of success. Success to me is one's ability to be authentically expressed as they were designed to function in the way that is balanced physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and environmentally. Anything less than that for me is failure because it leads to disconnection, it leads to anxiety, it leads to inner deficiencies, insecurities, anger, frustration, agitation, and self righteousness.
Hmm.
And so, what better role for me in this life than to become a model of being broken and then being put back together and then teaching those who are broken how to put themselves back together and then leave a legacy of information and practices and systems behind so that thousands of years from now people can access this information who are struggling with the same things that your audience yourself and myself was struggling with, which is the inability to be honest about what it is we're suffering from, and the inability to allow others to come in and to assist us in our journey to help us feel more complete and direct us towards self love.
Mhm. Absolutely. Well, first of all, I appreciate you sharing your story because even though it might look different for someone listening, you can see yourself in parts of your experience, whether it's the pain, the disconnect, the wanting more, striving for more. There's so many parts of your story that are so relatable. And I really hope that someone listening is like seeing themselves in that and realizing there is hope for a different uh, way of living through this.
Yeah.
And one thing that really stuck out to me was that, you talked about that limiting belief or that false belief that, pain is just part of the process of like achievement and just getting through the next thing. How did you transition that belief of pain being part of the process and really kind of like disconnecting yourself through that to a point where you could connect to your body and start listening to it and recognize that the pain was information for you?
The thing that happened is I ran a business called Fitness Fanatics in San Diego.
Mhm.
So before the invention of CrossFit, I was the original CrossFitter, right? And people were coming down watching my classes and then mimicking what I was doing and taking all people outdoors to do all these wild movements and stuff. And I taught a Wednesday night women's class. And when I came back from my first introduction of working with this guy, when I got to my class that night, instead of telling them what to do, I asked them what they would like to do.
Mhm.
And my mind at the time worked retroactively, meaning I would have an experience and I would have the awareness of what was going on in that experience that was unique, maybe hours, days, weeks, sometimes even months later.
Mhm.
Okay. That's typical for people who have emotional childhood trauma.
Mhm.
Their mind is retroactive. So that means that they're going to process everything days, weeks, or months later because the emotional body is orientated to the past.
Mhm.
That being said, um, the women in my class came back and I said to them, hey, you've done your warm up. Do whatever kind of warm up you wanted. And then we got into what they wanted to do, but they were looking at me very confused. And on my drive home after that class, I remember about halfway through so to get from Mission Beach to Del Mar is probably like a 22, 23-minute drive. About halfway through, as I was passing through La Jolla, I remember going, what just happened? And then I called the guy that I was working with and I was saying, hey, I was being different with these women. You need to tell me what was going on. And he
Mhm.
just started laughing, right? Because he knew from his observations when I spent those 4 days with him, us working 6 to 8 hours a day, that he could see the psychological shifts and changes that were happening. So once I realized the full impact and that I could get out of the hell that I was in, I worked on my body 5 to 6 hours a day. So basically, I took SEAL training and I turned it into HEAL training. And then every day, I was a radically different person every 24 hours. Some aspect of myself was dramatically changing, whether it was my communication, whether it was my sense of boundaries, whether it was my ability to communicate clearly, to be authentically self expressed, to have a sense of freedom internally, to feel hopeful. Everything about me was changing. My relationship with sleep, my relationship with food. And once I had that, then that made me even more ambitious because I was like, wow, I can feel this good with this little bit of effort over this amount of time. Imagine how good I could feel if I did more.
Mhm.
So then I
Mhm.
recruited all of my friends to get into the process with me, and we got into it. And
Mm-hmm.
every one of these guys is leaders in the holistic world now. And this is
Mm-hmm.
23 years later, right?
Yeah.
They're
Mm-hmm.
they are at the top of
Mm-hmm.
what it is they understand about holistic health, transformation, and growth. And
Mm-hmm.
we started this little community in San Diego, and we got after it. As my body started to feel more pleasure, and what I mean by that is this: you can feel pleasure through, deep interpersonal romantic connection and sensuality and sexuality, intimacy. But there's a different kind of pleasure where walking feels as good as sex.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think most humans have, I would probably say that 99.9% of humans have never had that experience.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
once you remove so much tension from your body,
Mm-hmm.
when you're moving, going to the grocery store, going to the laundromat, walking down at the beach, and this energy is pulsing through you. It's highly magnetic and electric. And all the ways that your bones are rotating feel so good. You're just like, I could live like this forever. I'll do whatever it takes to continue to live like
Mm-hmm.
this forever. And
Yeah.
of course, since I started that, I haven't had an ounce of pain or discomfort in my body in
Mm-hmm.
24, 20, 24 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I was motivated by because when I got into it, I thought I was getting into it because I wanted to be more successful with my body as an athlete.
Mm-hmm.
What I got out of it is I wanted to be more successful at being myself. And I knew at some point the only way to do that was to strip away everything that wasn't me
Mm-hmm.
and everything that isn't me or isn't you or isn't your audience.
Mm-hmm.
Is anxiety is an unnatural state of function. It's actually abnormal. What's normal is excitement. What's normal is love. What's abnormal is anger, frustration, agitation, irritation, hate, and rage. What's normal is righteous behavior relative to self, family, community, culture, nation, globe, solar system, galaxy, universe. That's normal. What's abnormal is self righteousness. What's normal is confidence and fearlessness. What's abnormal is fear.
Mm-hmm.
And so once these base states started changing, I became more motivated.
Mm-hmm.
And then I decided, hey, if I can get myself out of this, imagine what I could do for other people. And that's
Mm-hmm.
exactly what happened. And then people started bringing to me all the things that I brought to my teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Yeah.
I began to move through, basic, simple things like back stiffness, neck stiffness. It was all very sort of structural in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And then it became very advanced. Every decade, it got much more complex cases would show up, right?
Mm-hmm.
People who were going blind and, people who were in very complex abusive relationships and people who were having morbid thoughts and wanted to commit suicide and people who had been sexually traumatized as children and all these very deep trauma states started showing up. And so when I got myself out of my pain and got myself into pleasure, then the wheels really started to spin. And I
Mm-hmm.
could see that there was a road for humans to get out of the hell that they suffer from.
Mm-hmm.
And 99.9% of all humans are suffering from something very dramatic, whether or not they
Mm-hmm.
choose to share that, whether or not they choose to put down the good face and invite someone in to their internal story. But humanity went through the dark ages in
Mm-hmm.
every culture, whether you were in South America, whether you were in Asia, whether you were in Russia, whether you were in Africa, whether you were in North America, what we call Canada now, or Iceland or Greenland. All humans went through the dark ages. In
Mm-hmm.
those dark ages, they developed very specific strategies to manage their emotions, and humans became extremely dishonest. And in that dishonesty, we broke away from our birthright to be supremely aligned to source, to consciousness, to God, and to
Yeah.
be an emanation of light.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so if you have the ability to bring people back to their light, for me, what could be more motivating? Like
Mhm.
when I know, for instance, like I knew I was going to support Penn State at that wrestling thing. So I went to Asia. I was in a dark room training for 2 weeks. I was meditating 8 hours a day, working on my body physically 3 or 4 hours a day. I was in my dry sauna, at my infrared dry sauna, 2 hours a day. You know what I mean? I was like working because I knew I had to build up my light, right?
Mhm.
And I build my light up so that I could support them
Mhm.
weeks later. And
Mhm.
so that motivates me knowing the impact that if you're, as a woman and you're a listener, if you have children, the more you raise your light, the less your children have to do your homework. And I
Mhm.
think as a parent, the
100%.
most important thing is transformation because when a parent grows, whether it's the mom or the dad, typically women are more into transformation because transformation is a feminine quality.
Mhm.
Healing is a masculine quality. So you'll find more healers that are males, and you'll find more people that are into personal, more women that are into personal growth and into transformation than men. Why? Because transformation is feminine. So, and it's the highest functioning state of being and expression that you can have on this planet. And it's a
Mhm.
female quality. So, when you're looking at transformation and you're looking at growth, and I'm looking at myself, I have to I have to abide by science, meaning I apply the scientific method to everything that I'm doing. And then once I have the data and the information, I have to share it with those that are around me. And so if I know I was coming to support you or one of your listeners, then I would make sure that I got up in the morning, I did my dry brushing, I did my bathing, I was in the infrared dry sauna, I did my meditation, I did my exercises, I went and saw my acupuncturist and did my esoteric acupuncture. I went and got in alignment through an alpha biotics practitioner. Like that's just the basics of what I'm going to do to get prepared to help you co-create a miracle. And
Mhm.
as a parent, to bring it full circle, parents have a fiduciary responsibility, which is to raise their children.
Mhm.
Well, I would think that a mother would want to raise her children beyond her station. And the only way to truly do that is not by giving them things or giving them opportunities, it's by the parent transforming
Mhm.
where they're stuck into a fluid, unencumbered state of expression of consciousness and a higher level of intelligence. So when a parent changes, whether it's the dad or the mom, because half the cells in the child's body are theirs, when the parent changes that root based state of dysfunction into something that's highly functional, it automatically transfers to the child. Even if the child was on the moon, even if
Mhm.
the child was on Mars, because there's a concept in spirituality called all time is now, but what they left out is all space is now. So that means the parent and child don't have to occupy the same amount of space in order for the parent to have absolute influence over the child. And what I mean by that is that as an elder, a parent has a right to choose how their energy evolves, and the child is an expression of their energy,
Mhm.
their light, their love, their consciousness, their intelligence. So the most prudent action that any woman would ever take would be to solve the energy and the consciousness that's negative of self sacrifice.
Mhm.
Because
Absolutely.
otherwise, that's what you're passing off to your children, and your children get to be martyrs, which means they then get to be abused and
Mhm.
taken advantage of and taken for granted by others. So,
Mhm.
what would be the prudent action to take? It would be to solve that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a powerful statement because one of those things that, again, is one of those false beliefs that many high achieving women who are mothers is like self care is selfish or put my children first. But, when you realize that when you raise up your vibration, you expose your light, that you are doing the most selfless act for your child. You are giving them so much love by allowing them to see the most healed version of yourself. And Milet says this quote that most things are caught, not taught. So you can teach your kids to do all the right things, but they're going to see how you're living and your beliefs and how your nervous system is, and they'll feel the energy emanating from you, and they will respond to that far beyond what your words say to you.
And the
So
truth
much
is that
power.
is they have no choice. And what I
Yeah.
mean by that is that there's a concept out there, and this will make sense to you. All nervous systems vibrate to the highest functioning nervous system in a collective field.
Hmm.
Okay. So if you and I were best friends and we lived, in Northern California, maybe in Napa Valley, outside of San Francisco, and the Dalai Lama was going to
Hmm.
be giving a free teaching at the at some holistic center,
Hmm.
right, in San Francisco, and you and I were, hey, why don't we take him a case of wine? Well,
Hmm.
that would sound like a really good idea when we were in Napa Valley. But the closer we got to San Francisco, his nervous system would be informing us, don't bring that wine in the building.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay. And when we got out of the car, I'd say to you, hey, let's grab that case of wine. And you would look at me and go, yeah, I don't think he's going to drink that.
Hmm.
But while we were away, while we had distance away from him, we weren't underneath his sphere of influence. But when our car reached the parking lot, we would be dramatically influenced by his orientation and alignment to source consciousness.
Hmm.
Okay, so what that means is that he or she who has a higher vibration, everyone who is in that sphere in their sphere of influence now has to align to that higher state of function.
Hmm.
So as a parent, as a mom, as you raise your light, as you raise your consciousness, as you reduce your stress, as you reduce your tension, as you reduce your fears, your anxieties, your anger, your hate, your rage, your frustration, your agitation, your self-righteousness, your vibration increases, which means that it's moving faster. And then when
Hmm.
your children get into your presence, they are operating off of that new station of self realization that you have achieved.
Hmm.
And that energy is imprinting in their nervous system because the nervous system in the brain's job is to take millions of pictures every day. It's constantly taking in information and data of your experiences, and then it's cataloging them of what's valuable and what's less valuable. Okay. And then what's going to happen is those imprints are going to be passed around to whoever you related with that day. So as one goes, we all go, right? As one raises up, we all raise up together. And so as a parent and a mom who has children, women are responsible more for the emotional growth and the
Hmm.
spiritual growth of the child than the father is. The father's job is to get them to understand the physical world
Hmm.
and how to be mindful and how to have solid boundaries and how to have a safe environment to move through the world and develop the thing that it is they want to experience. And so, as the way shower of emotional intelligence and spiritual intelligence, it's essential that moms be honest with themselves, look at their inner deficiencies and their insecurities, find someone that they can talk to, admit out loud that they're imperfect, look at those imperfections as opportunities to grow, and then take heartfelt action to begin to learn how to love those parts that have been ignored, that
Hmm.
have been criticized, that have been judged, that have been disapproved of. And as they begin to do that through the daily practice of opening up their body, of opening up their energy, of self love practice, the question is, what's a self love practice? Well, when you meditate, you're loving yourself.
Hmm.
When you go to a breathwork class, you're loving your emotional body. When you meditate, you're loving your mental body. When you do exercises, which is what I've been teaching and developing. When you're doing yoga, when you're going to the gym, when you're going for a walk, when you're out in the ocean and you're going for a surf, you're loving yourself physically. Okay? When you are doing your spiritual practice, whatever that is for yourself, whether it's Qigong or Tai Chi or acupuncture, anything that's moving your energy, you're loving your spiritual body, right? When you're aligning and honoring your values, your morals, your principles, your ethics, you're loving yourself spiritually. But let's go the exact opposite direction. If you're going against your ethics, your morals, your values, and your principles, you're doing the opposite of love to
Mm-hmm.
yourself spiritually. When you ignore your body and you refuse to put it under stress, meaning eustress, positive stress,
Mm-hmm.
no yoga, no Pilates, no walking, um, only sitting, then you're doing the opposite of loving your body. You're just using it up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so if you look at your body, your brain, your emotions, and your nervous system, um, and your spirit as a bank account, right? How much money are you putting into that account
Mm-hmm.
every day? And the beautiful thing about this is the body only needs a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
The mind, it only needs a little bit. The emotions, they only need a little bit. The spirit, it only needs a little bit. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And exercises are 16 different positions that allow you to hit every form of spiritual consciousness, every form of emotional consciousness, every form of instinctual physical consciousness, and every form of analytical mental consciousness. And as you remove and you reduce that tension and that stress and that distortion, then the vibration rises. And now your impact on your sphere of influence is exponential with effortless effort.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to tell kids what to do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to guide and people tell them what to do or how to live. It's by emptying the body of the survival based strategies that have been passed on for a minimum of 7 generations, you experience a level of freedom and connection that is absolute beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love that. There's so much there and so much gold, especially talking about like the practices of loving yourself. And then when you're not doing that, it's probably hitting home. And like a lot of that, what you said to hit me home to me of like, oh my gosh, how long I wasn't loving myself by like neglecting so many of those aspects of, the wholesomeness of who we are. So profound. And I want to go back to what you were talking about as far as like the mother's influence when, you raise your vibration and then it affects your children. How does that work as far as like adults in your life? So like maybe an adult child with a parent or other family members that are adults, and maybe this person you're choosing to raise up your vibration, honor yourself, but maybe some other people are not. Does that also have the same sphere of influence on them if they're
Yep.
closed off to that?
Yeah, it has the reason why is it has the same exact sphere of influence whether they're in agreement or not. So let's take Yeshua, and everybody knows his story. Mary Magdalene has been accused of being a whore.
Mhm.
They throw her into the ditch. Everyone has a stone. They're getting ready to chuck them at her, and he steps in with, "Hey, ye who is without sin shall cast the first stone."
Mhm.
And they're all like, "Oh, my goodness, all right, put the stones down," right?
Mhm.
And they pull her out. But the question that no one ever asked was, why didn't they throw him in the ditch? Because if
Mhm.
we go back to the time, if we go back, 2026 years, what are we going to see? We're going to see gang mentality, right?
Mhm.
You do things the way that we do them. You don't say anything. Anyone who says anything that's outside of the way that we do things, we kill them. The question
Mhm.
is, why didn't they kill him?
Mhm.
Why didn't they throw him in the ditch? Well, they didn't because his nervous system was vibrating to a higher level of consciousness. So when he spoke, even those who weren't part of his family,
Mhm.
Even those who weren't part of his original community, they immediately uploaded to consciousness. And not only did that change there in that instance, it changed everywhere all over the planet in one
Mhm.
shot, right? So what I mean by that is this, is that any change that a parent makes in terms of elevating their consciousness, their intelligence, their energy, their vibration, their frequency automatically gets transferred to the children because half the cells in the child's body are theirs.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
every parent, grandparent, great grandparent has a right to influence their cellular lineage.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so when I rise up, everybody in my sphere of influence rises up,
Mhm.
whether they like it or not. And this is great. Women, daughters, mothers, sisters, they come to me all the time.
Mhm.
They have children, they have these complex relationships. And before you know it, within a short amount of time, those complex relationships, where some of them they haven't talked in years, oh no,
Mhm.
within 5 days, they're talking and everything is back to normal.
Mhm.
Because somebody in the lineage chose to break the pattern and change the frequency. Well,
Mhm.
once the frequency is changed, it can never go back to the old frequency that it was because it's evolved and it has transcended the limiting belief that was created while humanity was in the dark ages and implemented as a survival based strategy.
Mhm. Yeah.
Well, now the survival based strategy is gone. And now that
Mhm.
that's gone, no one no longer in that lineage needs to abide by the guidance of that limiting belief
Mhm.
because it's successfully been transcended at the epigenetic genetic level.
Mhm.
And so the
Yeah.
work that I do is the transcendence of that
Mhm.
at the epigenetic genetic level.
Mhm.
So we're removing those inner deficiencies and insecurities and beliefs and fears at the epigenetic level.
Yeah.
So what you would say is really we're removing it and transcending at the atomic subatomic level.
Mhm. Yeah, so interesting. And like a question I have off of that is that how do boundaries play a role in that? Do you, as you were evolving, were boundaries important so that you could navigate elevating your vibration, or is that something
Yeah,
that you
yeah. This is a great
integrate?
story. Yeah, it's a great
Yeah.
story. So I had a guy come see me who was struggling,
Hmm.
a big guy, always looking at the ground, which I was like,
Hmm.
why is he always looking at the ground? He's never really looking me in the eyes.
Hmm.
Well, comes to be that he had been sodomized by a family member when he was like 7 or 8 years old.
Hmm.
And sweet guy, kind person, generous, um, hardworking, committed.
Hmm.
And I taught him how to do handstands.
Hmm.
And his experience was he would go out into public, and whether he was in a grocery line or a line at the bank or a line at I don't know, like the place where you go on Sundays where people sell things and it's like a big yard,
Hmm.
like like
The
like an
market.
enormous, yeah, like an
Yeah.
enormous yard sale or something. But they have
Hmm.
a specific name in
Yeah.
San Diego for it. And people would always start stuff with him, and it was always these really small guys, and they would be like screaming at him publicly,
Hmm.
and he would just freeze. And so I said, okay, well, I know the lungs are the center for boundaries, so what's the obvious thing? So I taught him how to do this position, which would take 15 to 20 seconds, 5 times a day.
Hmm.
And within a month, all those behaviors stopped.
Hmm.
And then I would check in with him every couple of years. And still to this day, he's never ever had another incident where someone has attempted to invade and penetrate inappropriately into his physical or energetic boundaries.
Hmm.
And so boundaries are a huge part. When I'm working with a client, and I take people through a 5 day process to eradicate all those things, one of the first things that I'm teaching them is to elevate the intelligence in the lungs. Well, what are the lungs? If you look at the lungs are the only organ in your body where you can consciously choose to change the boundary. You
Hmm.
can't consciously choose to change the boundary of your colon
Hmm.
or your small intestine. or your spleen or your liver or your heart. But see, I can consciously choose. Watch.
Mm-hmm.
No change in my boundary right now. Still no
Mm-hmm.
change in that boundary. Change in the boundary.
Mm-hmm.
Change in the boundary. Change in the boundary, right? So the boundary of my lungs can change. So the
Mm-hmm.
intelligence of the lungs is around the orientation to one's boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you stimulate and you activate that intelligence, your intelligence rises. And when it rises, it informs. So the lungs are instinctual.
Mm-hmm.
They're part of the the make of the body that's responsible for instinctual intelligence. Heart,
Mm-hmm.
thymus, skin, lungs. Those are the four organs responsible for that.
Mm-hmm.
So when you stimulate the lungs, what you're activating is instinctual intelligence. And what that does is it informs instinctually all the other people in your sphere of influence that you keep your trash on your side of the street. And
Mm-hmm.
once that's done, whether the woman has been physically abused through domestic violence, whether she was sexually abused and she was raped in college, or she was on a date, or she got drunk, whether she was molested as a child, um, whether she had a mother who was obsessive compulsive and excessively controlling, whatever those things, all those ways in which another person who has a sphere of influence over you can break your boundaries, all
Mm-hmm.
that stops. And now it informs the exact opposite. And it's informing, hey, you have to respect my boundaries. And then
Mm-hmm.
their nervous system goes, okay, no,
Mm-hmm.
no problem. I will respect your boundaries. But when the lungs are deficient of chi, energy, conscious, vibration, and frequency, because the boundaries have been broken and they're turned off. Because once you break a child's boundaries, the boundaries never turn back on their own.
Mm-hmm.
They never happens. You can give a mental boundary. So let's say you and I were best friends, and I say to you, "Hey, listen, when you come over to my house, can you please wipe off your shoes? Because you work construction, you're always in the dirt, and Bobby, every time you come over, you're dragging mud through my house."
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a verbal boundary. You have to do that if you don't have instinctual boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And see, I have instinctual boundaries, so everyone knows when they come to my door, whether I told them or not, they always take off their shoes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to say anything to them.
Yeah.
They already know to do that
Mm-hmm.
because they can feel the boundary.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, when I go in here, I have to respect this person's space.
Mm-hmm.
And so they come in a very respectful manner because I have spent the time in doing the stimulation of activating the inherent intelligence, the instinctual intelligence within my lungs, which informs them I'm an empowered being and you have to respect these instinctual boundaries without me ever having to say a word.
Yeah, so fascinating. I've never heard it explained in that way, but it's like a deeper level than I feel like it's
Oh,
like boundaries. You just, it's the example you gave is like kind of where it ends when you hear about boundaries. I have not heard that
yeah,
aspects of it. So fascinating to get deeper into it. You were talking about earlier, and I want to respect your time. I know we're kind of nearing the end here, but you were talking about earlier, a lot of the women that listen to this would likely have that tight medial hamstring. Can you
yeah,
talk about some practices to work on that and how to address that?
yeah. That's simple. So,
Hmm.
and you've seen this with girlfriends, which you don't see with guys. Think about how many men's feet you've looked at and you never see their big toes going inward. And you
Yeah.
never see bunions getting built on the inside of that big knuckle, right?
Hmm.
Well, how come you never see that in men, but you see it in women? Because the medial hamstring is a feminine muscle. Men, you see, who's more bow-legged, women or men?
Mhm.
Men. Men are more
Yeah, yeah, I'd
bow-legged.
say yeah, that's true.
Yeah, men are
Hmm.
more bow-legged than women.
Yeah.
Okay, why are they more bow-legged? Because the lateral hamstring, which is masculine, is on the outside of the leg. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so when you look at a woman and you understand that her toes are going inward like that, you automatically know that she has poor communication with her sphere of influence around her desires, her wants, and her needs.
Hmm.
And she's come up with an idea that selflessness is the key to getting into heaven, and
Mm-hmm.
that selfishness is the fastest way to go to hell.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And if she's been indoctrinated into any level of religion, those are some, there's similar spiritual tenets, regardless of the religion, when it comes to selfishness and selflessness.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more they bought into that idea, the more their big toes will be pushed to the other side. They're being pushed to towards the little toe, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that'll let you know that there's too much weight. So let's say it's their left foot. If it's their left foot and it's the left big toe, then we know they're going to sacrifice themselves in their relationship with women. And we know that the mother was forcing that relationship to go that direction. Okay? If it's the big toe, then we can make the assumption, if it's the big toe on the right, we can make the assumption that they will severely sacrifice themselves in order to maintain relationships with men. Okay, so that's the first thing I'm looking at. So if we know it's the left toe, then we know it's the right medial hamstring that's
Mm-hmm.
causing that. And we know it's also the left vastus lateralis that's supporting that as well. Why? Because vastus lateralis is 180 degrees away from your medial hamstring.
Mm-hmm.
So when one of those muscles becomes too short and too tight, it rotates the bone. Let's say on the right side, it's getting rotated too internally. On the
Mm-hmm.
left side, the exact opposite thing is happening. It's getting rotated too externally.
Mm-hmm.
And so then what's going to happen to the big toe on the left? It's going to start pointing itself towards the little toe.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is, how do you interrupt that pattern? Now, if you look at her feet, if you go back and you go and you look at the mom's feet, well, the mom has the same thing. If you look at grandmom's feet, then those things they're really twisted up. Okay. And so I always take a direct notice of what's going on in people's feet because it tells me
Mm-hmm.
where their inner deficiencies are and their insecurities. And it already lays out a map of which muscles are too short and too tight.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, so these are predictable assumptions that I can already start making. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the first sign that they're going to get in their body that they're sacrificing themselves too much is that the knuckle of the big toe on the inside is going to start to get sensitive. Okay. And so the question is, what can they do? They can stretch their medial hamstring and they can stretch their quadriceps, but they have to be able to do it with force. Because imagine how much force it would take to rotate a bone in the wrong direction and the bones sit there in in a way that's constantly fixed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that rotation stays the same for the next 30 years,
Mm-hmm.
even though it's a malalignment. So in order to get a malalignment, obviously there's one main muscle that's causing that, but now the whole body is orientated to support that dysfunction. And so for women who struggle with sacrificing themselves in order to maintain relationships, the four organs they need to work on the most to bring the health up are lung, because the lung is the center for boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
large intestine, which is an honoring of their own utopian principles and their own individual principles, stomach, to be authentically self expressed, and spleen, to be able to communicate clearly to their own benefit, what their
Mm-hmm.
desires, wants, and needs are, and then to be able to have boundaries that allow them to take heartfelt action to realize those desires, wants, and needs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So they need to improve the health of their lung, large intestine, spleen, and stomach, and all the muscle and fascia and the energetic channel associated that moves through the belly of those muscles that go through those channels. So your women, they can easily, all they need to do, get on the internet and look into what's called tendomuscular channels.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Chinese medicine. So punch in TCM,
Mm-hmm.
tendomuscular channels,
Mm-hmm.
and look up lung, large intestine, spleen, and stomach. And then draw that out on their own body, and then go get a massage therapist or go get one of those guns right? And start massaging that entire channel of the lung, the large intestine, the spleen, and the stomach. Okay.
Mhm.
Otherwise, the easy way would be for me to teach them, right? Which would be super simple. In the future, there'll be some videos on YouTube where I'll be able to teach people how to do that for themselves. But for now, I'm busy with all these other things.
Mhm.
Okay. But that's something they can do. They can go see an acupuncturist who will work on their lung, their large intestine, their spleen, and their stomach. Okay.
Mhm.
They can go get a massage gun and look at where the tendomuscular channels flow through, and they can massage that on their own. Some people, they don't have hundreds of dollars every week to spend on massage therapists and transformational body workers. And so what do they need? They need, they can afford $35 and they can go to Costco and pick up a massage gun,
Mhm.
right? But really they need to learn Bestersize, because
Mhm.
Bestersize allows you to use concentric, isometric, and eccentric contractions in a balanced format that allows you to strengthen, recruit, and then stretch, which means open up these channels so those levels of consciousness, like martyrdom and self-sacrifice, can shift into clear communication to my own benefit. Right? And
Mhm.
that's where I can understand the frustration of women in the world. The problem is that women haven't learned how to communicate clearly what their desires, wants, and needs are. If you do that, men want to help you receive that. But if you don't say, hey, look, I have this need to have this experience, we can never help you. Well, we can then draw you into supporting what it is we want to do, but then eventually you're going to get resentful,
Mhm.
right? And so clear communication is the most important thing. And I would say sit in front of a mirror, look in deep into your own eyes, look into your own soul and say, what do I really need to work on? And
Mhm.
ask your body for support and help.
Mhm.
Then talk to your emotional body and ask it for better breath. And then talk to your spirit body, ask it for more energy. And then talk to your mind and ask it for more peace.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's some things that they can do. They can learn the six healing sounds, the two healing sounds that are for the earth element, which is stomach and spleen, is WHO who. It sounds like this, meaning it's subvocal. It isn't who, right?
Mhm.
It's subvocal.
Yeah.
And they could learn the six healing sound for the lung and the large intestine, which is the sound of a snake. And they can do that 9 times while they're in the shower,
Mhm.
right? Just, and then they can switch to who. And they can do that when they're in the shower, meaning
Mhm.
they don't have to add extra time to their day to do these things. They could do it on their way to work.
Right.
Even if
Mhm.
they're in New York and they ride the subway, you're doing it subvocal, so nobody's going to hear you anyway,
Yeah.
right? But
Right.
do something to increase the energy, the consciousness, the frequency, the vibration in the lungs, the large intestine, and the spleen and the stomach.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. And I love the actionable strategies. And again, it's just something you can easily incorporate and just to understand yourself more in a deeper way. Because again, a lot of the things you shared, like people could really just chalk it up to, oh, these are my genetics, and then just take a very passive role and be like, oh, my mother has this, my grandmother has it. But what if there is something deeper that's going on here? What if your body truly is trying to communicate something that's going on below the surface? So I think it's such a profound way to understand yourself better. And it's more empowering to realize that you don't have to just sit here and live your life the way you've always lived it. It's within you to
Yeah,
make these changes. So I love
yeah.
it. For someone who wanted to work with you, connect with you, where can they find you?
They can find me at truebodyintelligence.com. And the
Mhm.
first step really is to read my book, Free for Life. And if they're willing to do that, then they can email my assistant at support@truebodyintelligence.com, Christina, and she'll
Mhm.
set up a connection call after they read the book. And they could
Mhm.
easily follow me on Instagram, Christopher Lee Maher. Every 2 or 3 days, I'm leaving a little download or a little tip. And if they put a little bit of these things into action consistently over like a month, they're going to start to see incredible changes for themselves. And I like to give people things that are free.
Mhm. Yeah, amazing. I'll put everything in the show notes. And I'm just so grateful for everything you shared today. And I know that someone listening is there's a seed that's gonna be planted in this and just going to help them evolve and become that version that they know is within them. So I'm so grateful for everything you shared. And thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is awesome.
Yeah, amazing. And again, thank you for everyone who tuned in, and please, connect with Christopher and, follow everything that he does. And thank you so much for tuning into Rewiring Health. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. If there was something in this episode that really resonated with you or a message that stuck with you, please share it with someone else. It's only through sharing these messages that we can start to rewire our minds to feel empowered and live the life that we truly desire. Please subscribe so you never miss an episode. And again, thank you so much for tuning in to Rewiring Health.